Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Masuma Hassan Saiba, and welcome to all the participants, the speakers. I think that it would have been very beneficial if we had all the speakers. Let's hope Rustam Shah Sahab can join us later. But I'll start my presentation. I have some notes. My actually, I hope you can hear me and see me. Uh, so I think my topic, was Doha peace talks, Taliban perspective. And then the additional topic is Russia and Afghanistan issue. And uh, the other topics which were to be presented by Riaz Saab and Rustam Shah Saab, we will see later. If they can't join us, then maybe we will talk about that as well. Let me first talk about Russia's latest peace initiative concerning Afghanistan when it hosted a 3-day meeting in Moscow from March 18 to 20th in a bid to break the stalemate in the intra-Afghan negotiations being held in Doha, Qatar since September 12 last year. It was a new effort by Russia to reassert its role as a peacemaker in Afghanistan after having hosted intra-Afghan conferences and a gathering of regional countries in Moscow in 2018. Russia was the first to bring together Taliban and their Afghan opponents in Moscow for consultations. It has managed to revive the Afghan peace process whenever it has hit snags. So I think Russia has to be given some credit for that. Also, the Russians, through their veteran diplomat Zamir Kabulov, who was Soviet Union's ambassador in Afghanistan in the past, so the Russians have remained relevant through him to the happenings in Afghanistan, even though it was the Soviet Union that, in the first place, triggered the more than 4 decades old Afghan conflict by invading the country on Christmas Eve in 1979 to prevent the fall of the old Afghan of the communist regime and install a president, Babar Karmal, of its choice. The Moscow meeting, as we know, brought together a select few countries, including the US, China, Pakistan, and Russia. Qatar and Turkey attended as observers. The host country termed it a trio plus meeting rather than a conference, as only three major stakeholders, I mean US, China, and Pakistan, plus Russia, joined the consultation. President Ashraf Ghani's government was also invited, along with some Afghan politicians, including former President Hamid Karzai, who aren't part of the ruling coalition. The 12-member delegation that came from Kabul under the leadership of the High Council for National Reconciliation head Abdullah Abdullah, including politician and rights activist Habiba Sarabi, who noted that she was the only woman in the meeting room. So out of these, about 21 Afghans, she was the only woman. As we all know, Taliban have yet to appoint any women delegate in their negotiating team. Taliban Deputy Leader Mullah Abdul Ghani Biradar led the 10-member Taliban delegation. As expected, no breakthrough in the deadlocked Doha talks was achieved. It was merely an exchange of ideas. The US will now try to break the stalemate during its proposed intra-Afghan conference in Istanbul, Turkey in April, and also when the foreign ministers of mostly Afghanistan's neighboring countries hold talks at a UN-sponsored meeting. US is aiming to seek agreement on a peace deal between the Afghan government and Taliban at the Istanbul conference. This is rather overambitious, as a deal cannot be clinched in one big conference unless groundwork is done beforehand. Russia's peace initiative was overtaken by events, as the US had already made certain new proposals to end the Afghan war by sending its special envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, on his first visit to the region after he was retained in his job by the Joe Biden administration. Uh, Ironically, Biden said this agreement between Taliban and the Trump administration was not solidly negotiated. But the same person, Zalmay Khalilzad, who negotiated the agreement, has been retained in his job. So, subsequently, Secretary of State Antony Blinken's sharply worded letter to President Ghani outlining these proposals to emphasize the urgency for agreeing on a roadmap for peace got leaked to the Afghan media, triggering an intensive debate about its merits and demerits. Still, there were some positive takeaways from the Moscow meeting. The participating countries called for reduction in violence and backed a negotiated political settlement to end the long Afghan conflict. It advocated that inter Afghan talks should focus on fundamental issues such as ceasefire and formation of the future peace centered government. It demanded protection of the rights of women, children, men, and war victims during the peace talks. Taliban didn't get the desired support at the Moscow meeting, considering the fact that they had good relations and contacts with Pakistan, China, and Russia. All three have backed Taliban inclusion in any transitional or power sharing arrangement as a result of the peace process. Disappointed, Taliban didn't display any enthusiasm for the Moscow joint statement while the Afghan government welcomed it. Though the joint statement asked for reduction in violence by all parties to the conflict, it was primarily aimed at Taliban because they have been accused of launching more attacks in recent months. Taliban were asked not to launch the annual spring offensive, which is usually launched in March and April. They were asked not to do so to help create the right conditions for peace talks. The four countries made it clear they don't support the return of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan established by Taliban when in power from 1996 to 2001. The statement also said all sides should opt for diplomacy and respect women and minorities' rights in place of fighting. This too was directed more at Taliban than Kabul. Taliban termed as unacceptable the joint statement opposing the return of the Islamic Emirate by arguing that only the Afghan people had the right to decide the kind of government system they wanted. Taliban denied responsibility for the rise in violence when the group's deputy leader Mullah Biradar maintained at the Moscow meeting that they had reduced their attacks after signing the Doha Agreement. But he insisted that the US should also meet the commitments it had made in the deal. He didn't elaborate about this commitment, but it clearly meant the non release of further Taliban prisoners, about 7,000 still in custody of the Afghan government, and removal of names of Taliban leaders from the UN Security Council blacklist as committed by the US in the Doha Agreement. The hawkish Taliban chief negotiator Sher Mohammad Abbas Tanakzai warned of consequences if the US didn't abide by the May 1 deadline for withdrawing its forces. Now, the divergent positions taken by the rival Afghans at Moscow showed the deep divide that won't be easy to bridge, to resolve. But the broad agreement on the peace process among Russia, China, and the Pakistan and the US was a reason to remain hopeful. Now, we already talked about the Taliban perspective in the Doha peace process, but let me uh, add a few points. We have to keep in mind that Taliban, I believe, will attend the Istanbul Inter-Afghan Conference next month. but Doha will remain their preferred venue for the talks. Taliban Political Commission has been based in Doha since 2010, and Qatar has been very nice and supportive towards the Taliban. Now, 60% of Taliban members of their Rahbari Shura, which is the highest decision making body of Taliban, about 25 people, 60% of them are now in Doha. So they have a high level of representation in Doha and they won't like to shift. Turkey has also made it clear Istanbul won't replace Doha as the regular venue for the talks. Turkey and Qatar are allies and they don't want to harm their relations on the question of venue for the intra-Afghan talks, even though Afghan government wants to shift the venue from Doha to another place as it believes Qatar is pro-Taliban. Another point is Taliban position on the May 1 withdrawal is clear. They have warned that non-withdrawal of US forces would be violation of the February 29 Doha Agreement and would have consequences. The ceasefire will end and Taliban attacks on US-led NATO forces would resume, leading to airstrikes in retaliation by the Americans. There has been no Taliban attack on the foreign forces since the February 29, 2020 agreement in Doha, and not a single foreign soldier has been killed in the last 13 months. That is likely to end. We have 3,500 US forces. The American media is saying that, although the American government was saying that they only have 2,500. But then we have about 10,000 troops from the other NATO member countries, and about more than 20,000 are these civilian private contractors, you can call them mercenaries, who have been hired from different African countries, and also there are these Gorkha soldiers from Nepal who are protecting the foreign forces bases and their supply lines. Now, I believe Taliban won't agree to a permanent ceasefire unless they achieve something to satisfy their fighters during the talks. Taliban have now given a plan for reduction in violence, and that is something positive. Ceasefire will remain the top agenda point for Kabul and Washington. But for Taliban, decisions about the future government and the system of governance and justice are at top of the agenda. They could not agree on the agenda despite talking for a few months. And we all know that they were able to reach an understanding on the rules of procedure, or you can say the code of conduct of the talks after nearly 3 months of talks. This explains the difficulties in taking forward the peace talks. We also have to take into account the 5.5 months lost last year after the Doha deal to start the inter-Afghan talks on the agreed date of March 10, 2020, due to President Ashraf Ghani's refusal to release Taliban prisoners. In fact, this was an exchange of prisoners. 5,000 Taliban prisoners were to be released in exchange for 1,000 government servicemen. That finally happened, but Ashraf Ghani had to call the Loya Jirga to seek its permission to release Taliban prisoners. There were so many hurdles, but US pressure worked, and eventually Ashraf Ghani had to relent. And also, I believe in future also, US pressure is going to be decisive, and that will make Ashraf Ghani government to agree to many things which it is opposing now. Taliban are also coming under increasing pressure to reduce violence. We know Taliban and the US are already negotiating in Doha. Recently, Zalmay Khalilzad and General Scott Miller, who is the NATO forces commander in Afghanistan, met Mullah Biradar in Doha. So they are in touch, and they could find a way out, as Biden will like to delay the withdrawal of his forces for a few months. He said recently It could happen, but it is going to be tough. However, there's another sticky point. Biden's intention to keep an anti-terrorism force in Afghanistan for some time to fight ISIS or Daesh, Al Qaeda, and other global militant groups could become a major hurdle for peace, as Taliban won't agree to it after having committed not to allow such groups to use areas controlled by them to threaten the US and its allies. The US will be keen to at least maintain control of two air bases. Maybe one is Bagram, the biggest one, and the second could be Kandahar or Shindan in Herat province. Uh, but the US, the UN, and Kabul don't think Taliban have dissociated from Al Qaeda. The Taliban claim there is no Al Qaeda now in Afghanistan. Mike Pompeo, when he was the Secretary of State, had said there were less than 100 to 200 Al Qaeda fighters left in Afghanistan. So there aren't many, and they are struggling for survival. They have not been able to launch any attack on the US or its allies since the 9/11 attacks using the Afghan soil. Now, the new US peace proposals have tried to satisfy both Taliban and the Afghan government. Their viewpoints have been taken into account, but neither the Afghan government nor Taliban are enthusiastic about the US plan, including the formation of transitional government. President Ghani is opposed to transitional government and has made public his plans through his aides to propose fresh elections in 6 months during the Istanbul conference. Taliban also say that past efforts to make transitional government haven't delivered, so they are opposing it. Taliban have also rejected Ghani's new proposal for holding fresh elections. Taliban continue to insist on revival of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and haven't made public their views on democracy and elections. So, we are still waiting whether they will join the political mainstream. They already have a political wing in the form of the political commission based in Doha, but they need to form a proper political party and transition from an armed group to a political group. That, I think, will not happen easily because Taliban have used force to make themselves, legitimate, and also to force the Americans to negotiate with Taliban in the absence of the Afghan government. So they have achieved a lot by using force, and they will not easily give it up. Also, Taliban say that we cannot take part in elections until there is a foreign military presence in Afghanistan. Ghani, on the other hand, said he will only hand over power to an elected president, though he will succumb, as I said earlier, to US pressure as in the past. So I think the US pressure is the key because it is the biggest, supporter of the Afghan government in terms of military and economic assistance. It is still giving more than $4 billion annually to sustain the Afghan security forces. And Ashraf Ghani has said on record that his army will break up, it will collapse if there is no foreign international assistance for 6 months. So if the army collapses, you can imagine how long the Afghan government will survive. And US military analysts, security analysts keep saying that this government cannot survive if there is no foreign help or foreign military presence. Now, my last point is the road to peace is still long and difficult. But the good thing is that the talks haven't been given up, and a military solution has been ruled out by all sides to the conflict, including the Americans, Taliban, and the Afghan government already has been very weak. This means that talks will continue even if there are hurdles on the way. So, 18 months talks took place between the US and Taliban. to resolve an issue which was at that time 18 years old. Now it is 20 years old. It is the longest American war in history. But it took 18 months for them to negotiate the Doha peace agreement. Now, these new talks between the intra-Afghan talks began in September last year, and we don't know how long they will continue and whether these talks will deliver and whether any agreement which is reached can be implemented. So I think I will end here my talk, and maybe we can take questions, and or we can give the floor if Masuma Hassan Saiba decides to Roshan, and then talk about the other topics.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank you very much indeed, Rahimullah Yusufzai Saab. That was a very sweet, comprehensive view of the never-ending conflict which seems to afflict that country. We will come to Mohtarma Saiba in a little while because we have fortunately been joined by Ambassador Rustam Shah Mohmand. So I will first give the floor to him. Ambassador Saab, can you hear me? Ambassador Saab, Ambassador Rustam Shah Mohmand, can you hear me?
Hello?
Ji, Ambassador Saab,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Hello?
Ambassador Rustam Shah, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Well, welcome, a special word of welcome to you, Ambassador Saab.
Thank you
And
so much.
you are most welcome, and I will now give the floor to you. Ambassador Rustam Shah Mohmand is a well-known expert on Afghanistan, also on Central Asian affairs. He has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Afghanistan from 2002 to 2005, and he was also Chief Commissioner for Afghan refugees in Islamabad for almost a decade. He was also a consultant to the UNHCR for a few years from 2008 to 2010. So he brings with him both ambassadorial and diplomatic expertise as well as his experience on the ground. He will speak on the Afghan peace process and the role of regional states, Pakistan, China, India, and Iran. The floor is yours, Rustam Shah. Sir.
Thank you so much. That was a very exhaustive talk summary of the events given by Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. The Afghan endgame, regrettably, doesn't seem to be in sight, despite very hectic diplomacy and a lot of enthusiasm and support by the people inside and outside for these talks that have been held, that are going to be held in several locations, Doha, Moscow, and then now looking forward to Turkey. I will restrict myself to speaking on the role of the regional countries, the neighboring countries, in the context of the evolving situation. First of all, China. China, of course, has a huge investment in Afghanistan, in oil and gas, and in the Anak copper mines south of Kabul. And it would like to include also Afghanistan in the CPEC, in the Belt and Road Initiative. It has a border with Afghanistan, but it has another problem. It faces serious problems on account of the insurgencies in the western Chinese provinces of Xinjiang. And it believes that Daesh could become a partner in inflicting damage on people and government installations in that province. And it is convinced that only a Taliban inclusive government can defeat, dismantle, and eliminate Daesh. And that is the reason that it has been coming close to Daesh for the last several years, and has to Taliban for the last several years, and it has established formal relations with the group. And Taliban delegations have been visiting China in the past. This logic also applies to Russia and to Iran, because both Russia and Iran are also convinced that Daesh is a potent threat to the stability of Central Asia and the Muslim republics of Russia bordering Central Asia, and Iran, which has a Sunni population all along the border, also fears that Daesh could pose a potential challenge to the stability of Iran in future. And they are also convinced that only Taliban can deal with them effectively and help in eliminating this menace and this threat. And they are also convinced on another point. They now believe that the Taliban do not have ambitions beyond the borders of Afghanistan. It is not a Hizb Islami, Jamaat Islami, Akhwan al-Muslimin type of organization. It is a movement that only is dealing with Afghanistan and has no design to impose their ideology or their philosophy on any other Muslim territory beyond the confines, beyond the borders of Afghanistan. And for that reason, they believe that Taliban inclusive government could bring peace, stability, not only to Afghanistan itself, but also to their borders. India's role, of course, it finds mention in several Pakistani narratives, mostly for wrong reasons. There is a belief in Pakistan that India is a spoiler and that India would not like to see peace return to Afghanistan, and that India has been using Afghan territory overtly and covertly against Pakistan whenever it finds an opportunity to do so. Now, this may not be, in my view, a very correct appraisal of the situation. India is the 5th biggest donor to Afghanistan's reconstruction. Number one, why and how should India see a destabilized country for their investment going down the drain? Number one. Number two, India is an energy deficit country. It is dependent on Central Asia's hydrocarbon resources, for which Afghanistan provides the springboard. And it would use Afghan territory for importing energy resources from Central Asia. And that is the reason that it has invested heavily in the Iranian port of Chabahar. And Chabahar is going to become a very busy port in the years to come because of India trading with Central Asia through Afghanistan. So India would like to see a stable, peaceful, progressive Afghanistan, where on the one hand, India's own investment is protected, and on the other hand, it provides an opportunity to India to trade freely with Central Asia. And then, of course, India has had 2,000 years of civilizational contacts with Afghanistan, and India is a regional power. More than India, the Afghans get annoyed when we try to restrict India's role, when Pakistan tries to restrict India's role in Afghanistan, Pakistan has the right to demand that Afghan territory would not be used against Pakistan, directly or indirectly, by any government, including that of Taliban. That is Pakistan's right, and every government in Kabul has to ensure that. And they have to provide safeguards. But beyond that, Afghanistan is a sovereign, independent country, and it has the right to cultivate relations with neighboring countries, with regional countries, particularly countries like Central Asia, China, Turkey, Iran, and of course, India. So that is about India's role. I think that in the past, the Afghans have not really liked Pakistan trying to dictate terms on how Afghanistan would formulate its external policy. As far as Pakistan is concerned, for Pakistan, the stakes are high. No country would benefit from peace in Afghanistan as much as Pakistan, and no country would suffer as much from the instability of Afghanistan as Pakistan. So other countries may have concerns, Pakistan has stakes. But there are these developments which have been eroding the goodwill that Pakistan had in Afghanistan in terms of having kept the Afghan refugees for so long. There is this fencing of the border, for instance, and that has caused severe resentment inside Afghanistan. The trade with Pakistan is diminishing. Pakistan is no longer the biggest trading partner of Afghanistan. Iran and India are emerging as the future big trade partners of Afghanistan because of our own policy. The conditions at Torkham and in Chaman, and people waiting by the thousands for their visas, and the restrictions having been imposed on several commodities, the ban on Afghanistan trading with India through Pakistan, the fencing of the border, of course, has disrupted trade. It has caused pain and misery and suffering to people on both sides because they can't visit their relatives. They can't do any trading. In the name of security, all this has been done at a cost of $1 billion, and millions of dollars would have to be expended each year to maintain this fencing. Now, we are fencing the border with Iran. India is an eternal enemy. We're fencing the border with Afghanistan. So where do we go in the 21st century? I think these are matters which require a dispassionate evaluation so that we take decisions that are in the interest of this country and in the interest of peace in the region as a whole. The key to resolving the conflict, in my view, lies with Washington. And the biggest obstacle to peace in Afghanistan is Ashraf Ghani's government, because they are the product of the status quo, and they would like to maintain the status quo. They would like to maintain the status quo because it delivers privileges and power and authority and perks. And by agreeing to an interim government, they would lose all these perks and positions and authority. And the only way out of this impasse is the creation of an interim government that is multi-ethnic, that is broad-based, and that has the Taliban in a dominant position. It will have to have other factions. It will have to have other political parties, other groups, including that of Jumbish Milli of Dostam, including those of Ismail Khan of Herat, including the Jamiat Islami, including the Shura-e-Nazar, and others and others. And it will have to rule Afghanistan for a specified, for a stipulated period, maybe 2 years or 3 years, and it will have to be created by a Loya Jirga. A Loya Jirga can create an Afghan government, a transitional or interim Afghan government, multi-ethnic and broad-based, for a period that they would certify, they would fix. And after that, of course, Taliban will have to convert their movement into a political party with a manifesto and goals to run for elections post the interim government. So this is roughly the picture today. The Afghan government is awfully dependent on American assistance, on NATO assistance. $4.5 billion alone are allocated for defense and for the police and security forces. And beyond that, there is the economic assistance. Afghanistan generates less than $2 billion only in revenue. But things are awful inside Afghanistan. The opium production has gone up to 7,000 tons under America's watch. The Afghan government controls only about 45–46% of the territory. The Taliban control the rest of the territory, where they impose taxes. And also the American convoys, when they pass through their area, they have to pay taxes. Corruption is, of course, endemic. Unemployment has surged to more than 60% in Afghanistan, and that explains why thousands of people are leaving Afghanistan every month. Some, of course, were recruited by Iran in the Iranian militias operating in Syria. Some succeeded in going to Europe. Many drowned in the sea on the way to Europe. The alternative to an interim government is anarchy. And that anarchy would not only spell disaster for the war-stricken country, but it would also destabilize the whole region. So the time to act for America is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Sahib, for this for pointing out all the obstacles to peace, as well as all the factors which can lead, unfortunately, to anarchy in Afghanistan, which will have such an impact, an unfortunate impact on the whole region. I would now like to request Ms. Roshan Sirran to take the floor. It is my great pleasure to welcome her especially. She is based in Kabul. She is the founder and executive director, Training Human Rights Association for Afghan Women. She has over 40 years of experience in fighting for the rights of the Afghan women. As an NGO leader, as an advocate, as an elected legislator, she was also a municipal worker. And she has taken the cause of for the rights of the Afghan women to 15 different countries, and also to Afghanistan's formative traditional Loya Jirgas. She has represented the rights of Afghan women at many fora, notably at the Bonn II conference in Germany in December 2011. She will speak in Pashto, and Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai has consented to translate as she speaks. She will speak on the role of Afghan women in government and social and political circles. Roshan Sirran Sahiba, you have the floor.
د لوی او بخښونکي خدای په نامه د احساس په ګونګه ژبه به څه وایم نه ویو مې د ویل ترجماني کا
In the name of Allah, and she has recited a verse, a poem, you can say, and she says that, I want to give voice to my thoughts.
د سلام په وړاندې کولو سره خوشاله یم چې تاسو معززینو سره په دغه ناسته کې ګډون لرم
I'm happy that I am speaking to such an august gathering.
زمان په ډیر زغاسته پر مخ ځي نسلونه یو بل پسې راپورته کیږي خو وختونه شیبې درنګونه ټول د انسان د بریو ټکلونو ویاړونو قصې خپل ماضي ته سپاري
We know about history. There have been so many generations, so many issues, but we learn from history, and we have to confront all the challenges which we are now facing.
او راتلونکي نسل دې ته هڅوي چې هغوی پر خپل حساس او ویران ذهن کې تنظیم کړي او د هغه نه تاریخ جوړیږي
We have to pass on to the new generation all these lessons so that they are able to walk on the proper path and to make a successful journey in future.
هو زموږ د افغان میرمنو تاریخ د اماسونه ډک او په مختلفو دورو کې د بیلابیلو ستونزو سره د خپل واقعي حضور د ساتلو لپاره نه ستړي کیدونکې مبارزې کړې دي
Afghan women have faced so many issues. There has been so much suffering, but the Afghan women have fought all these challenges and they offered sacrifices.
اوس په دې حساسو شرایطو کې چې زموږ ګران هیواد افغانستان د یو لوی آزمون سره مخامخ دی افغان ښځې تر هر وخت نه زیات خپل فعالیتونه ګړندي کړي دي
In these very difficult times when the Afghan nation is turning a page and there is an opportunity, I know from personal experience that the Afghan women have become even more active in fighting for their rights.
د دغه فرصت نه چې د افغانستان د سولې د پروسې په تړاو منځته راغلی ده او د افغانستان د خلکو په برخلیک باندې بحث کیږي اړوندو ارګانونو ته وړاندیزونه لرو او د مختلفو لارو د هغوی غوږونو ته رسول شوي او دغه عدالت غوښتنې د افغان میرمنو لخوا دوام لري
At this point of time when there's a peace process, peace talks going on concerning Afghanistan's future, we, the women activists, are trying to inform and educate the Afghan female population about their rights and how to struggle for their rights.
افغان ښځې د هر هغه پروسې نه چې رانې حساب ورکوونکې او د ټول شموله او پایې باقاعده سوله وي ملاتړ کوي
Afghan women will support all peace processes which will lead to peace and an inclusive government and a government which cares for the Afghan people.
یوازې په نمایشي حرکتونو باندې نه سوله راتلی شي او نه جګړه پای ته رسیدای شي.
The cosmetic measures cannot lead to durable peace and end the conflict. So we need concrete steps for peace.
هو داس به نوي هما په واقعي توګه به سولې ترلاسه نشي.
And if we don't look into these issues, we will not have peace.
د نړیوالې ټولنې نه چې د افغانستان د خلکو د بشري حقونو، ښځو حقونو او لاسته راوړنې د بیان آزادي، رسنیز خپلواکي خوندي وساتل شي، د هغې نه ضمانت غواړو.
We want guarantees from the international community that all the achievements made during the past 2 decades in Afghanistan, democracy, the freedom of the media, the right of women, and the right of civilians, those must be addressed. And if this is done, then we can have durable peace.
ځکه پرته له نړیوال تضمین نه هر ډول ناببره پیښه کیدای شي منځته راشي. افغان ښځې د تیرو کلونو ترخې پیښې هیڅکله نه دی هیر کړی.
Without international support, we cannot achieve all these objectives. And the Afghan women cannot forget the past when they suffered so much.
افغان ښځو د نظام او سیاسي جوړښت د ساتلو لپاره ځکه پلویان دي چې جمهوریت د ښځو لپاره په هر ډول ټولټاکنې کې د پوره ګډون حق او د حکومت حساب ورکول خلکو ته ضمانت کوي.
The Afghan women support the peace process because we believe it will lead to more democracy, and under democracy the rights of the Afghan women will be protected. There will be an inclusive government, there will be elections, there would be the freedom of speech, and their rights would be protected.
د هدفمن وژنې چې پکښې ښځې، مدني فعالینو، د بشري حقونو پلویان، رسنیز کارکوونکي او ملکي کسان خو نښه کیږي او په شهادت رسېدلي دي، د کوم قید او شرط نه باید توقف ومومي.
We want an end to the target killings now taking place in Afghanistan. So many women activists and media people, others have been targeted. And we want this to stop because it is creating fear and it is becoming a hurdle in the peace process.
پر ګاونډیانو د منطقې او سوله غوښتونکي خلک او د نړیوالې ټولنې باندې افغان ښځې غږ کوي.
جمله پوره کړئ.
بله، چې د تحمیلي جنگ اصلي قربانیان د افغانستان خلک او د بیلګې په توګه افغان ښځې دي.
We appeal to the international community and to the human rights bodies and others who are concerned about the violation of human rights, women's rights abuses. We ask them, we urge them that they should play a more active role in protecting their rights because, if the Afghan women continue to suffer, their enthusiasm for the peace process will not be as strong as it is now.
نو د سولې موضوع په ګروګان ونه نیول شي او د تړل شوې دروازو تر شا په هر هیواد پرته له افغانستانه زموږ په برخلیک پلانونه او پریکړې دې ونشي.
We don't want closed-door meetings without the participation of the Afghan people and representatives to decide our future. We want the Afghan people to be fully involved, especially the Afghan women, in the peace process.
دا زموږ حق ده چې خپله د افغانستان وګړو نارینه، ښځینه او د ټول قومونو د جګړې قربانیان او شهیدانو کورنۍ په ګډون د یو ملي اجماع په ترڅ تصمیم ونیسي.
We want that those who have suffered, men, women, war victims, civilians, they should be protected. They should be supported under any peace process. And it's very important because their suffering has been untold and no real steps have been taken to end their suffering.
افغان ښځې باور لري چې د 4 لسیزې نه زیاته جګړه هیڅ ګټونکی نه لري. هیڅ یوه ډله د تاوتریخوالي او د جګړې نه پاتې ورانیو باندې ویاړ نشي کولی.
We are sure that this war, which has been going on for more than 4 decades, has no winners. It hasn't resolved the problems. That's why it must end, and peaceful means should be used to resolve the issues.
یوازې د جګړې د سمدستي بندولو په صورت چې د تلپاتې سولې ته زمینه برابره شي، ښکېلې ډلو ته ویاړ وربخي.
We want an end to the attacks, an end to the fighting. If this does not end, then it strengthens the combatants. So in fact, we want them to stop fighting, to stop the attacks, to reduce the violence, and that will lead to a proper peace process.
او تلپاتې سوله د افغان ښځو د معنادار ګډون سره چې دوی د باقاعدې سولې د تضمین کوونکي په حیث بریالي کېدای شي، ځکه چې هیڅ ملي پروسه د نیمایي نه زیاته وګړي یعنې ښځو پرته بریالي کېدای نشي.
For a durable peace in Afghanistan, you need to involve half the population, which means the Afghan women. Without their participation and support, you cannot have permanent peace. So they must be involved.
افغان ښځې د خپل ملي اردو، ملي پولیس، ملي امنیت چې د هېواد د استقلال، ملي حاکمیت او ارضي بشپړتیا ساتونکي دي، پلوي او ملاتړ کوي.
We support the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, and the national security organizations because they are protecting the country, defending the country, and without them, we will be in a state of chaos.
له دې امله دوی د لا په وسلو او مهماتو اکمال او پیاوړي شي. عدالت باید د سولې قرباني ونشي.
We want that these security forces should be strengthened to play their role, and we should not sacrifice justice for the sake of peace.
افغان ښځې له ملګرو ملتونو څخه غواړي چې د امنیت شورا د پریکړې د لارښوونو سره سمدلاسه میرمنې د افغانستان د سولې په پروسې کې د 1965 پریکړې سره جوخت شامل کړي څو د ښځو د حقونو ساتنه وشي.
We want the UN to follow the Security Council resolution, and we want them to protect the rights of women as committed in these resolutions.
د څلور لسیزې ټپل شوې جګړې قربانیانو ته د درناوی وشي او د سولې په پروسه کې د دوی په استازیتوب شتون ته پاملرنه وشي او د ژینیو د کنوانسیونونو پر بنسټ حقیقت پلټنې او عدالت باید پلی شي.
We want the war victims to be compensated, to be supported, because they have suffered so much. We also want the decisions of the Geneva Conference to be implemented, because, you know, those who have suffered from the war need support.
افغان میرمنې باور لري چې د سولې ټینګښت په افغانستان کې سوله په ګاونډي هیوادونو منطقه او نړۍ کې ده. نو له دې امله خپله صادقانه هڅې زموږ د هیواد د سولې په پروسې کې اړوندو ارګانونو باید ونسپموي. ژوندی دې وي سوله په ټوله نړۍ کې. مننه.
This was her last point. She said, long live peace, and she is thanking all of you. Her last point was that, you know, the regional countries, neighboring countries, should play a positive role in the Afghan peace process, and they will benefit. Afghan peace will benefit the whole region and the whole world. That's why every stakeholder must play a positive role in bringing peace to Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, because she has brought out the human aspect to this great tragedy. So when we speak about the conflict in Afghanistan, we mainly speak about negotiations, but she has brought out the human suffering. Would you tell her, Rahimullah Sahab, that she should stay online because there may be some questions for her?
Yes, I will tell her. Da Roshan sahab da wai tasu shukriya da kai dera manana او دا وی چې تاسو هغه د خلکو چې کوم مشکلات دي د ښځو ستونزې دي په هغې باندې خبرې وکړي. دا ډېر ضروري خبرې وې ځکه چې موږ خو زیاتې خبرې وکړې په مذاکراتو باندې او په جګړه باندې، خو تاسو یو بل د هغې چې کوم اړخ دی نو هغه واضحه کړو او دا تاسو ته خاص کړي چې تاسو په لاین باندې اوسئ. ممکن دی تاسو نه څوک اوس پوښتنه وکړي د هغې جواب به ورکړئ.
Thank
you. I will stay online.
Thank you very much. I will now open the floor to questions and answers. And there are many, many questions. I don't think we can accommodate them all in the time we have left, but we will cover as many as we can. The first two questions to you, Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. There's a question from a person called Umar who says, when will we treat the Taliban for what they are, a self-serving actor and not a friend of Pakistan, despite their optics of less than hostile entity to Pakistan than the Northern Alliance? And there is another question, you can take the two together, is one from Mr. Hassan Habib. Rahim Saab, Salam. Can there be hope in the near future, really, for peace in Afghanistan?
Okay, so the first question is, you believe that the Northern Alliance was not as hostile to Pakistan as Taliban. That I think is the gist of your question. And when will Pakistan change, its policy? I thought that when I talked about the Moscow meeting and the statement given by these four countries, China, Pakistan, Russia, and the US, opposing the return of Islamic Emirate of Taliban, and also, asking Taliban not to launch the spring offensive and to use diplomacy instead of force to resolve the issue. I think that could also mean a change in policy. So I think that, it is in the interest of all that we play our role to end the fighting in Afghanistan. But I think one country alone cannot do this. It has to be a collective effort. So Pakistan, China, Russia, America, maybe also Qatar, Iran. Iran should be involved. That's very important. And I am, it was satisfying that the US wants to invite the foreign minister of Iran also to the UN sponsored conference. So I think that, India also has a role, if it is not involved, it can play the role of a spoiler. So India has to be involved to play a positive role in Afghanistan. So I think that, maybe we all say there were mistakes made by Pakistan, and maybe mistakes were made also by Afghanistan. But we have not gone to war. There have been clashes. The border issues are still there. They don't recognize the Durand line as the international border. There's the issue of safe havens in both countries. So I think these should be resolved. We are talking. We have not broken our diplomatic relations. And now, Taliban have to be persuaded to play a positive role for peace in Afghanistan. I think they are doing it at this stage. The second question is there hope? I think I and Rustam Shah Sahab, maybe we both ended on a very pessimistic note, but I think it is a good omen, a good indication that the talks are continuing. There has been one peace agreement between Taliban and the US. Inter-Afghan talks are taking place. The Americans and the Russians have showed renewed interest in the peace process. All the neighboring countries are becoming involved, and the Afghan people primarily want peace. So they want the peace process to succeed, which is very important. So let's remain hopeful. I think this war has to end, and if it ends, it will lead to the benefit of all the neighboring countries as well.
Here is a question from an anonymous attendee. Regarding the Taliban, how certain can we be that the Taliban will not have a rogue faction within itself with the more ambitious desires and therefore want to, he uses the word attack, but I would say approach other countries once they have attained political influence in Afghanistan? Ambassador Saab, Rustam Saab, would you like to take that question? Please unmute yourself, Rustam Shah Saab.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, this is a question which says about the Taliban. How certain can we be that the Taliban will not have a rogue faction within itself with more ambition and therefore want to attack other countries once they have attained political influence in Afghanistan?
I think let's not make assumptions. Afghanistan is devastated. Taliban have an uphill task. They have to rebuild the country. They have to reconstruct. They have to rehabilitate the people. That is a gigantic task in which they would need the support and cooperation, economic, technical, managerial, of many countries in the world, including the regional countries. So for them to be losing interest in that gigantic task of reconstruction and rehabilitation, and then to be playing a rogue role, I think it's absolutely beyond comprehension. So there is no possibility of that ever.
Here is another question which either of the panelists can answer. India was not invited to the Moscow conference on Afghan peace. What do you think? What was the reason for that?
My answer is that.
And linked to
Okay.
that, is there any likelihood of a power tussle among various factions of Afghan warlords after the withdrawal of US and NATO forces?
I think the first question regarding India, Iran also was not invited. There were only 4 countries which Russia thought were the most important stakeholders. So Russia was there, and I said earlier, trio plus. So these 3 countries, America, Pakistan, and China were invited. Russia was the host. So, if India was invited, then Iran should also have been invited. Maybe Turkey, not as an observer, or Qatar. They were both observers at the Moscow meeting. Then there would be other claimants also, Britain and say Saudi Arabia and so many others. So I think this was a restricted conference, and they wanted to have intimate discussions. They were able to agree on most of the issues, which I think is very important. So if there was some maybe more countries, there would have been divergent opinions, and we needed a consensus on issues, which happened in Moscow. But I think India will be invited to the UN-sponsored conference of foreign ministers. So Iran will be there, India will be there as well. They can play their role. The other question, maybe Rustam Shah Sahab can answer that.
Rustam sir.
Well,
Is there
I agree.
Is there any likelihood of a power tussle among various factions among the
Well, of
Afghan
course, if there is no agreement, if there is no prior agreement on the governance systems, on who is going to govern, who is going to take place, which party, which faction, which interim government is going, if there is no agreement on those vital issues, Afghanistan may descend into anarchy. There are no warlords as they used to be in the past, but there are powerful people even now in Afghanistan who command considerable support and following in their own parties or regions or factions. So for that not to happen, it is imperative, it is necessary that before the complete withdrawal of all foreign forces, there should be some agreement in principle at least on who would take place, on who is going to rule Afghanistan after the withdrawal of foreign forces, and that has to be through a Loya Jirga. Loya Jirga is a traditional Afghan mechanism, a traditional Afghan institution which decides on issues which confront the whole country. And like in the past, when John Kerry was Foreign Minister of America, he came to Afghanistan and there was a Loya Jirga. And the Loya Jirga created the position of a chief executive. The position of a chief executive was not there in Afghanistan's constitution, but Dr. Abdullah has been a second to the chief executive by virtue of the decision of a Loya Jirga. So a Loya Jirga has to be convened. Loya Jirga would represent all tribes, all regions, all areas, all ethnicities, and they will have to decide on the formation of an interim government. And when that is decided, then of course we can be rest assured that Afghanistan would transition from one part to another peacefully, and there'll be no the eruption of violence. There'll be no warlords vying for power. I think if that is not done, there is a possibility that clashes would begin to take place. The Taliban may begin to advance on Kabul, and of course there would be then a sort of a civil war, which must at all costs be avoided.
Here is a question about the post-Trump scenario. The international community has 2 prime tools of leverage to wield in the peace process: troops and financing. with President Biden likely to continue with former President Trump's withdrawal plans, financing seems to be the best tool available. How could the international donor community play its role in the peace process in Afghanistan? This is with respect to the donors. Rahimullah sir, would you like to answer? In fact, both of you can.
Yes, I think if you recall, there was the Geneva conference held some time ago, and they have, committed to continue helping Afghanistan with assistance, with money. I think it is about $14 billion. And also there's a commitment, until the end of the decade of transition, which will be the end of 2024. By 2014, we all know that bulk of the NATO forces withdrew, and then there was a three-pronged transition. There was a security transition, economic and political transition. So that will continue until 2024. So that commitment for international assistance, mostly by the Western countries, is there. And there have been new commitments as well. So I think, this help will keep coming to Afghanistan. Also, if you remember in the Doha agreement between Taliban and the US, Taliban actually asked the US to continue assisting Afghanistan with financial support, and the Americans agreed in the Doha agreement. So even Taliban want the Americans to continue helping Afghanistan after the peace process. So I think there will be money coming in, but this money has to be properly used. There has been so much corruption. Afghanistan always has been among the 5 top corrupt countries or corrupt governments in the world. So that money has to be properly used and monitored. We have this organization called CIGAR, which reports to the US Congress, and it is led by Mr. Sipko, and he recently, and he is saying is in reports about the wasted money, how many projects were started and not completed, how much money was paid to the warlords, how much money made its way in briefcases to the UAE. So I think that is very important, that the money keeps coming and the money is used properly.
There are 2 questions for Roshan Saiba. The first question is from Dr. Kaisar Bengali. He asks, in the event of a forcible Taliban takeover, he uses the word forcible, but it could come through peace also. What strategy will the Afghan women have to protect their rights?
روشان صاحب تاسو سره یو لمبه پوښتنه ده. کیسر بنگالي صاحب یو ډېر مشهور پاکستانی اکونومست دی، معاشي ماهر دی. هغه دا وایي که طالبان په زور باندې قبضه وکړي نو د افغان حکومت په څه عکس العمل وي؟
ډیره زیاته مننه د دغه ګرانه وروره زموږ چې پوښتنه یې وکړو اقتصاددان صاحب. ما مخکې هم په خپل خبرو کې وویل چې جګړه د حل لاره نه ده. همداسې چې د افغانستان حکومت، د افغانستان خلک، د افغانستان ښځې او نارینه په دې باندې باورمند دي چې د جګړې د لارې نه طالبان نشي کولی چې افغانستان قبضه کړي، او په دې خبره باندې بین المللي هیوادونو هم تاکید کړی ده. نو د جګړې د لارې نه خپل زړه د جم وساتي. دا افغانستان د څو لسیزې مخکې افغانستان نه ده. دا یو خبره. دوام خبره دا چې د تفاهم د لارې د توافقات د لارې هر آنڅه چې د دغه لاسته راوړنې چې مونږ لرو افغانستان دولت ساختار او جمهوریت با حفظ شي نو چې دوی راځي د دې لارې نه د لویه جرګې د لارې نه اساسي قانون باندې څه خبره چې په ګډ افغان وګړي به تصمیم اخلي او د جمهوریت د لارې نه په ټول ټاکنه کې دی ګډونو کې هر څوک چې وګټه او د هغه په اساس باندې افغانستان وګړي خپل هغه پیشنهادونه چې ده عملي کوي. مننه.
She is thanking you, Mr. Kaisar Bengali, for your question. Her answer is she is ruling out a forcible Taliban takeover. She says the Afghan government and national and security forces will resist that. Taliban should realize they cannot capture power again. Afghanistan has changed from the past when they were in power. Also, she's saying there is no military solution, and if Taliban join the political mainstream, they accept the constitution, they take part in the election. If they win the elections, they are welcome to take over power, but this must be done peacefully and through negotiations.
But Rahimullah Saab, the Taliban don't believe in elections.
دا یو بل پښتنه ده چې طالبان خو ټول ټاکنې نه مني نو بیا وسکو
نو دا طالبان خو هر څه به وایي چې دا نه منو مونږ نه دا خو یوازې د هغوی تصمیم نه ده چې د هغوی تصمیم ده دلته افغانستان کې عمومي اجماع ده دایر شي څه چې د افغانستان خلک غواړي د هغه په اساس باندې بین المللي سوله‌پال د حقوق بشر پلویان هیوادونو هغوی د هم نظر ورکي او نظارت بین المللي نظارت او تضمین کوونکي دی موجودي په هغه صورت باندې بیا کېدای شي چې د حل لاره پیدا شي دا د یو خوا موضوع نه ده چې ارسه یو خوا یا د افغانستان دولت وایي یا مثلا طالبان وایي دا د افغانستان د خلکو حق ده چې تصمیم واخلي ځکه چې په ټپل شوی تحمیلي جنگ کې افغانان قرباني ورکړی ده د افغانستان ښځو ماشومان نارینه ټول نو د دوی حق ده چې دوی تصمیم واخلي یو خواته نشي تصمیم اخیستی
She said that Taliban may say many things. They may make many demands, but you don't have to agree with them. If they don't accept elections, then this is not the solution. She says that, the international community, big powers, they should also ensure that there is a peaceful transition through democracy. She says that Taliban or the Afghan government alone cannot decide the fate of the Afghan people who have really suffered, who have suffered the most. So she says that it is the right of the Afghan people to decide their future, not the Taliban or the Afghan government alone.
But the Taliban are also the Afghan people.
دا وی چې طالبان هم افغانان دي کنه افغان وګړي دي دا غي هم حق شته کنه
طالبان چې د افغانانو وګړي دي نو طالبان دي د افغانان ښځو د افغانان ماشومان مدني ټولنې رسنیز ځوانان دا ټول خلک چې وژني دا په کوم ګناه باندې دوی خو نظامی خلک نه دي دوی خو د دوی د پاره په جګړه کې په عمل کې په جګړه کې نه دي نو د دې د خاطره طالبان هم چې افغانان دي دلته د راشي افغانانو سره یو ځای دي تصمیم واخلي او د دوی بری په جنگ کې نه ده په هغه کې بری ده د دوی چې زمینه د سولې د پروسې د تطبیق دپاره برابر کړي او که داسې ونه شي نو دا بری به هیڅوک به په لاس نشي راوړی.
She says that yes, Taliban are Afghans, but why are Taliban killing Afghan civilians? Why are they killing, civil society activists? So they have to realize that they have to coexist with the other Afghans, and they have to become part of the political and democratic process. They should take part in the elections. They should not use force to come into power. So she says that this is in the interest of all, that there is a peaceful transition.
That's true, but they have, taking the argument forward, but they have just said that they don't believe in elections and that all elections in the past in Afghanistan have been scandalous. Here is another question. This is from Mr. Shah, who is a member of this institute. And he says that how does she feel about a traditional Loya Jirga running the state until the transition is completed for Taliban to join the political system properly. And of course, the Loya Jirga is an exclusive male gathering. What would be a traditional solution to engage the women that would be acceptable to all parties?
Actually, let me tell Mr. Shah that in the recent Loya Jirgas, women have been represented as well. Not in large numbers, but they were invited. And they're also, members of parliament. But I will ask Mr. Roshan Sirran, da yau bala pukhtana da tasu dipara da wai che da Loya Jirga che da no ko da de Afghanistan da hukumat pa uburi kana waqt ke uchalai so pure che neve tol takane nishi wi او هغه دا نظام uchalai او هغه کې د خزم نمائندګي وي نو دا به څنګه شي؟
بله اصلا لویه جرګه خپله ځان ته وظایف لري. د لویه جرګې وظایف معلومداره خبره ده چې د اساسي قانون په ارتباط باندې لویه جرګه کولی شي چې تعدیلات، تغییرات او یا نوی اساسي قانون تصویب کړي. نو په دې حساب باندې په لویه جرګه کې د ټولو ولسوالیګانو، د ولایاتو، د ښځو، د ټولو اقشارو نمایندگان په هغه کې ګډون لري. نو کېدای شي چې لویه جرګه چې د افغانستان عالی ترین مرجع د تصمیم گیری ده، کېدای شي چې هر تصمیم هغوی ونیسي هغه پلی کېدای شي په افغانستان کې، نه دا چې یو موقت حکومت یا مثلا انتقالی حکومت یا یو شورا دا د څو کسانو لخوا انتخابیږي. دا د افغانستان د خلکو او په زغرده درته وایم د افغانستان ښځو دپاره د منلو وړ نه ده. اصل د دیموکراسي هغه رای ورکولو ده چې هر یو پکې ځان پیدا کړي. نو د هغه لاره نه چې په هر طریقه چې د هغه لاره چې پلی شي افغانستان خلق او په خاصه توګه مونږ ښځې دغه پلویانو.
She says that Loya Jirga has some very known functions and responsibilities. It is called at the time of crisis to offer solutions. So it can propose amendments in the constitution or even make a new constitution. There's a famine, there is war, whatever. So Loya Jirga has very well-defined functions. She says that Loya Jirga has representation from all the regions, ethnic groups, women, parliament. So it's a very time-honored and representative body at the highest level. It can just take decisions, but she says that, forming a transitional government or running the affairs for the interim period that maybe will emerge from the peace talks, from the peace process. She says that, the only way for change of power should be democratic elections. There should be no other principle involved in bringing a change.
Maybe the next question can be answered by Ambassador Rustam Shah. Will the presence of America be required permanently to provide stability in Afghanistan?
Not really, but I believe that the Taliban would agree to a limited presence of American forces for a short period of time, pending the normalization of conditions, the normalcy. And upon that, when the normalcy would return to Afghanistan, all foreign forces would have to pack up and go, lock, stock, and barrel. I think that is the bottom line. But for a limited period of time, for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe they agree to a very small segment of such forces, which are only acting in their advisory capacity, training upon in counter-terrorism. Beyond that, I think they would not be agreeable to keeping a large force for an indefinite period of time, because they believe that the May deadline has to be kept, has to be honored. But of course, as I said, if there is an agreement and if this is the only obstruction, this is the only obstacle, then we can go around this by suggesting that the American forces for some time, keeping 1 or 2 bases only with themselves, would remain in Afghanistan in their advisory and technical capacity.
Could you also take the next question, Ambassador Sir?
Yes, what's the next question?
Mr. Asif Humayun, Admiral Asif Humayun. He wants to know if India can play a useful role in the Afghan peace process.
Well, I think not directly, because Pakistan would be opposed to that. But India will have a role in the sense that India would try to promote the formation of a government which would bring stability and peace, and which would enable India to trade with Central Asia through Afghanistan. That can happen, and maybe that if relations between India and Pakistan continue to improve, there are signs of that happening now, maybe that then Pakistan and India both would have to play a very constructive role inside in the rehabilitation and reconstruction of Afghanistan. Afghanistan needs help. India provides help. I think in principle there should be nothing wrong with that, as long as I said that the basic Pakistani demand that Afghan soil would not be allowed to be used by any government, including that of Taliban, against Pakistan. Let me also tell you that a government that includes Taliban would also endeavor to seek good relation with India. So that, I think, is a point that sometimes we try to overlook and ignore. And we believe that if the Taliban come into power, of course, the relation between Afghanistan and India would remain hostile, etc., etc. That is not going to happen. There are huge, there are suspicions about Pakistan's role in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, most of the goodwill that we earned has evaporated because of some of the steps, some of the measures, some of the policies that we have adopted, using the leverage that we have with Afghanistan in a way that would offend Afghans. So because we have had such extensive involvement in the relationship with Afghanistan that suspicions arise from time to time, and people begin to point their fingers at Pakistan for not doing this and not doing that, and doing this and doing that. So I think we have to be aware of the sentiments and sensitivities of the people of Afghanistan, and we would have to stay clear of Afghanistan formulating its own vision and determining its own destiny in the light of the objective realities and in the light of the ground realities that the country faces now and in future.
There are many questions, but I will only put forward two more because we have to wind up. There is a question from a young intern at our institute. It is to Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai. Considering how ISIS has been quite active in Afghanistan, and considering the fact that if the Afghan government collapses post-US withdrawal, other separatist groups will also spring up. Is this an opportunity for the US and the Taliban to be uneasy allies against a common enemy?
I think that, IS poses some threat to all the countries of the region and also beyond. It is in their interest to cooperate. But there has been no real cooperation, I must say, even against the ISIS. We also have to keep in mind that, earlier everybody was saying that after the defeat of the ISIS in the Arab world, in Iraq and Syria, most of these fighters will come to Afghanistan. I don't think that has happened. Some may have come, but not in large numbers. We know that the ISIS was growing since 2014 in Afghanistan, the IS in Khorasan, but now it is not, I believe, controlling any territory in Afghanistan. It was really strong in certain areas like Nangarhar in eastern Afghanistan near the Pakistani border, and also, in other provinces like Kunar, Nuristan, and in the north, in Jozjan and Faryab, but they have lost all territory. They have mostly been defeated by Taliban. The Americans also have killed some of them in drone strikes. The mother of all bombs was used by the Americans against ISIS in Nangarhar. The Afghan government also have launched certain operations against ISIS, but ISIS is still there. It keeps claiming responsibility for certain attacks, especially against the Afghan Hazaras. I think that there is some, discussion and maybe some misgivings or confusion about as to who is supporting the ISIS. So Hamid Karzai and many other Afghan leaders have been accusing the US of supporting the ISIS. Taliban say that the ISIS is being supported by the Afghan intelligence and maybe by India or the US. So there are different viewpoints regarding, the presence of the ISIS. But I think ISIS threat has declined. It will keep trying to reorganize, keep trying to attract Taliban fighters to its side. It happened initially, but it is no longer happening. I don't think they are able to recruit much in Pakistan or Afghanistan now. They have some supporters, some sleeper cells, some facilitators, and they also have allies like Lashkar-e-Jangvi al-Alami. But I think that the threat is now receding. It is declining. And if all these countries join hands to fight the ISIS, I think it can be eliminated.
There's a suggestion from Dr. Khalilur Rahman Sheikh that perhaps, this is a suggestion, that perhaps UN peacekeeping forces can be used in Afghanistan and all foreign forces withdrawn. And then general elections can be held, and all parties should contest these elections under the UN auspices and hand over power to a party having a majority in the general elections. But of course, that all depends on whether the Taliban agree to participate in any general elections at all. And this is the last question, and this is a question from me to all three panelists. How will the various Taliban factions be reintegrated into Afghan society if peace prevails in Afghanistan? Ambassador Saab, would you like to answer first?
Well, there are no factions within Taliban. There is a very small group, but that group only draws support from 4 to 5% of the people. But the predominant, the acceptable, the recognized, the acknowledged group is the one that is being led by Hibatullah Khunzada, who is believed to be in Pakistan, and his shura is half in Pakistan, half in Qatar. So there could be a possibility of, in the event of the group forming a government, there could be a possibility of breakup, of dissensions, of disaffection in certain quarters. That could happen. But for now, of course, the Taliban are staying united. Although there are whispers of differences, because the group in Shura and the group that is based in Qatar have been accused of having lived a life of luxury for many years, and they are not in touch with the ground realities in Afghanistan. They are not able to communicate with the commanders inside the various provinces in Afghanistan, so that the commanders and the rulers and the shuras are forced to make their own decisions, etc., etc. But for the time being, of course, the group stays united.
Rahimullah Saab, would you like to respond?
Yes, my answer is that Taliban movement emerged in the autumn of 1994, and we have seen in the last 24, 25 years, they have remained largely intact. There have been no major defections. We have seen that anybody who differs or who leaves the Taliban movement becomes a nobody. One faction emerged after Mullah Akhtar Mohammad Mansoor was made the leader, supreme leader after the death of Mullah Omar, and that group was led by Mullah Muhammad Rasul, who is now in Pakistan's custody, but his group has broken apart. Most of the people have returned to the mainstream Taliban group. So I don't think that there are any major groupings, and I think the reason is that they have one supreme leader, Hibatullah Khunzada, before him Mullah Mansoor, and before him Mullah Omar, and that they call him Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he has to be obeyed in every respect. And they have a shura which makes collective decisions. And even those in Qatar, they cannot decide on their own. So they send their envoys to Pakistan and to Afghanistan to discuss and consult the shura and the commanders. So that's why they have been able to remain intact. And I think that so many efforts were made, temptations, money, force were used, but Taliban movement has not broken apart. Yes, if there's a peace agreement, maybe there will be some opponents of the peace agreement if it does not meet their expectations. Yes, some Taliban initially joined Daesh, including a top leader, Abdul Rauf Khadim, who was being held in Guantanamo by the Americans and then released and later killed by the Americans in a drone attack. So there have been certain, defections, but I think if they come into power, if they sign a peace agreement, there will be reasons for some, some differences. But I still believe that, it's not really a party, it's a movement, and they have remained intact, and in future, by and large, Taliban will remain intact and united.
Thank you very much. And I will now wrap up this absolutely interesting webinar in which we have covered almost all aspects of the global and regional dimensions of the Afghan conflict and focused also on the movement and the dialogue and negotiations which are going on for reaching a peaceful end to this seemingly never-ending conflict. And we have covered almost all aspects of this conflict, the role of regional states, the Doha peace talks, the Taliban's perspective on peace, also the emerging importance and role of Russia in this whole process, and the role of Afghan women, their suffering, their apprehensions, and also their hopes for the future, that they should be able to get the rights which they consider their own in any future setup. I want to thank all the speakers, and I will take many thoughts with me. I will take this thought which came from Ambassador Rustam Shah Mohmand, that the present government of Afghanistan is the greatest obstacle to peace. But more than that, I will take this thought with me, which has come from Ms. Roshan Sirran, that peace should not be made at the cost of justice. I thank you individually, Ambassador Rustam Shah Mohmand, Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, Ms. Roshan Sirran. And we all laud technology a great deal, but technology can also create problems. And because of a technological glitch, we were deprived of the presence of Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan. My thanks to all the participants also, and all those who posed many interesting questions. And I hope that once this terrible pandemic is over, we can all gather to do in the library of this institute. Khuda Hafiz, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Roshan Sirran Sahib, tashakkur.
ډیره زیاته مننه د ټولو نه خوشحاله یم چې تاسو سره وم او خاصتا یوسفزي صاحب چې تاسو همیشه د خبرونه څه چې اورم او ترجمې نه دم ډیره زیاته تشکر مننه.
She is thanking all of you and especially thanking me for the translation. Thank you. Shukriya.
Thank you for the translation also, Rahimullah Sahab.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Shukriya ji.
ډیره زیاته مننه.
کار مې کوم کنه
کار کې
دا څه کوي دا مل اسوب جاري ولي ولي جاري mana pakai majak baba macam majak